And Ken, let's begin with a game that a week ago we didn't know was going to be played. I mean,
not only that, they didn't even know it was possible that these two teams would even, have the opportunity to face off.
Well, it gets even better because the way they went about it, and again, I didn't get the details on the story. Maybe you did, but Washington State had just played Brigham Young the day before and lost. Non-conference game, but it is a regional game at the very least. They get on a private jet. Well, actually, it's a private turboprop plane, but they showed the picture of the plane on Instagram. So they all pile into this this small airplane, and they go from Provo, Utah to the East Coast just to sneak a non-conference game in. And, you got to love life in the Pac-12. I was about to say Pac-10, Pac-12, because, they travel long distances to begin with. Okay, I even showed up on the schedule because now what they often do is they stay on the road. Let's say, for example, if they're going to play Cal and Stanford, which they are going to do right out of the Christmas break, they'll stay in the Bay Area. And then they'll play Arizona, Arizona State, and USC on a southern swing. But travel in the Pac-12 is expensive. But this is ridiculous. Just to shoot out there on a back-to-back for a non-conference game, and I'll tell you something, they're not bad. They played Stony Brook really tough.
Yeah. Among one of the best teams, in the Pac-12. In terms of RPI, actually entered the afternoon with a higher RPI than Stony Brook. They're among the top 60 schools, Stony Brook around the top 80. That's definitely going to change. They came in the day receiving votes in the national polls, Matt. So, they were a team not to take lightly. But as you said, crazy circumstances leading to this happening, especially considering, as we said, these teams weren't scheduled to play each other. Today, originally, Washington State was supposed to play against Cornell, and that would have been a 3 p.m. start time for them. That got canceled. Meanwhile, at the same time, Stony Brook always had Sunday off, but their Tuesday game against Marist got canceled. So, as well as their Tuesday game against Hofstra.
That's right.
One thing leads to another.
That's one of the reasons why they wanted to get one in there, but finding an all-too-willing participant in Washington State, of all people, that's random. But here's the thing.
Yes.
Okay, it is the first time in program history that the Seawolves have beaten a Power 5 opponent at home. Well, first of all, they never get them at home, number one. Right. So this is an oddball game in and of itself. But a big win for the Seawolves, 69-62 the final. And it was a game that was anything but decided until the final seconds because, of course, the Seawolves having to go to the line and hitting all their free throws, which was great. Yep. But I'll tell you something. Erlette Scott had a hell of a game, 20 points, setting the pace for the Seawolves. And the other great thing about it is that they were pretty good at hitting their shots, too, close to 50%. They were 50% in the first quarter, then they tapered off a little bit in the second, but really poured it on the third and the fourth. And the funny thing was, the day before at Brigham Young, Washington State had hit a bunch of threes and couldn't hit from the field at all within the arc. And today, it was kind of the other way around, where they were bombing threes all over the place and had a lot of trouble hitting him, only 20%. They went 7 for 35.
Yeah.
Okay, 35 three-point attempts. And I don't know what the record is in terms of three-point attempts against on the Seawolves, but that's got to be up there.
Yeah, you want to talk about two teams that loved small ball, Matt. This was the game. Both teams taking plenty of shots from long range. And as you said, in Washington State's case, weren't really connecting on too many, especially towards the bottom part of the game. But it was that top half of the game where they stay alive because, they may be taking 10 and only making 2 or 3. But on the other end, Stony Brook was working the inside as well, keeping it a tight contest.
Well, their lead player is, of course, Charlize Ledger-Walker from New Zealand. She took 27 shots of her own, 6 for 27, 4 for 16, 16 threes herself. Okay, just to give you an idea, the Seawolves only took 13 as a team.
Right, exactly.
So,
And that's an interesting thing, too, because I think you put it great, is that these two teams, while the play styles were different, obviously Stony Brook worked a lot inside. Washington State Cougars, they worked from long range. They were still, I thought, pretty even through virtually the whole game. You could tell by halftime, the score was tied. They were essentially matching each other, blow for blow throughout the contest.
And that's it was the interesting thing.
Because of the different play styles, where, as you said, they really relied on really one player to get a lot of their scoring outputs. Similarly, some of the Stony Brook teams in the past, back when, Shania Johnson was around. But now we look at Stony Brook, and they had 3 or 4 players really step up. Yeah, Arlette Scott did a lot of the scoring, 20 points. Annie Warren came back from injury, and she finished with 14 of her own and was a big part of Seawolves hanging in there in the second half, along with India Pagan with 12.
They didn't take any free throws the entire first half. They didn't start taking free throws until the fourth quarter. And Arlette Scott hit 6 for 7. Anastasia Warren, as you said, 4 for 4. India Pagan took a couple, 2 for 2. And 13 for 15 overall. But they weren't really put on the line until the Cougars were forced to foul. And when the time came, they hit them. And the great thing about it, too, is that they maintained their composure throughout, and they weren't throwing desperate shots up. Their selection was good, and they were very deliberate in what they were in the shots that they took. So they were 4 for 13 from 3, which is okay. 26 for 57 from the field, which is also okay. But the most important thing is Arlette Scott 7 for 14. Anastasia Warren 4 for 9. India Pagan 5 for 7. So again, not a lot of shots. Khalees Corley 4 for 5. Not a lot of shots, but what they took hit.
Yeah, and honestly, the game changer really came in that third quarter. It was 37-all, and out of nowhere, Stony Brook just goes on an 8-0 run to extend their lead. And you said Corley really started that with a 3-pointer. And then that was followed up by another bucket from her. So her, as well as a layup. She was responsible for 6 of those 8 points, adding a couple free throws from Vargas Reyes and Arlette Scott. So she really coming off the bench, she really stepped up, I thought, today for the Seawolves, and was a surprising, factor as well. But, with some of their key usual players still out, like Zilchek. Well, Gizmichet got her minutes, but for, Corley really stepping up as that 6th player for the team, I thought was big. And she was really just hard to guard for the Cougars, and it showed because she didn't have to do too much, but her 9 points were really what swung momentum in Stony Brook's favor.
Well, even more importantly, in their 21 minutes, you got the 9 points. Nobody on the team had to play more than 32 minutes.
Yeah.
In other words, Gigi Gonzalez didn't have to stay out there all day long, and neither did Warren, neither did Scott. Scott had 30, Warren 32, and Gonzalez 32 herself. And Leah Amory Wool, 27. So even among your starters.
She had an interesting stat line, huh? No points, 10 rebounds, 8 of them defensively, and was a kickstarter in some of those fast break opportunities. Had a pair of assists and contributed to some of those second chance opportunities as well.
Yeah, and that's an important thing too to take note of, because she didn't get on the board. As a matter of fact, she only attempted 4 shots and didn't hit any of them.
Or a couple inside, yeah.
Yeah, in heavy traffic. But I'll tell you something. This is a big confidence builder, I think, for the Seawolves. Yeah. One they didn't anticipate, and they were anticipating a battle over in Hofstra and Uniondale, as is always the case. But instead, they come up with a monumental win here, as we said. First win against a power conference team at home. And a game that wasn't even on the schedule last week. Now, what's coming up?
Win
Go ahead.
It was a statement win for a team that already came in full of confidence. They were 8-1 on the season, going up against an 8-2 team, receiving votes, as I said, and they managed to outshoot them, going 45, 30, 86 from the field. And even with their bread and butter 3-pointers, not having necessarily relying it too much today, they were able to get it done inside and established they really got some great depth pieces, coming from the bench, some new players really stepping up for others that were out. Even Annie Warren, who was out, coming in, and she didn't play her best game, but I thought still played really good, especially in her first game back. So this team, to me, is the team to beat in the America East. And honestly, they got to start getting some national attention now that you beat, a team like the Cougars.
Well, not only that, Washington State, they made the NCAA last year. The Pac-12 sent 6 teams, half their conference, to the NCAA, and they were the 6th. But they were picked to finish higher this year, and they went in with a pretty good record, 8-2, now 8-3. But most importantly, they're a team that's on the rise, and the Seawolves caught them, at a rather odd time. Like I said, maybe the back-to-back affected them. I don't really think it affected them that much. But what's coming up for the Seawolves, because of this game and because the Hofstra game got canceled, they have a nice long Christmas break. But they're back in action next Thursday, not this coming, but next, the 30th. And that will be at NJIT, and that is when the America East schedule kicks in. And then we get them back at home on Sunday, January 2nd, at home against Hartford. But it's going to be America East the rest of the way, and they're set up perfectly for it. I think that this was a great tune-up to get into the America East and have your confidence riding high. And, maybe somebody will sneak up on them here or there. Are they going to have a perfect record in the America East? We don't know. But still, they're still the best team in the conference, and they've proven it.
By a long shot, too, Matt. I'm sure you're looking. Take a look at the stats so far. Every team playing at least 8 games. Stony Brook's the only one above 500. Vermont's at 500 at 5-5. Every other team is below 500, including Hartford, who's 0-10, who's going to be their first home opponent, and NJIT, who's 5-6, who they're facing next. So you look through the conference, and there's a lot of games on those schedules that are really should wins for this women's basketball program. And honestly, to me, is it possible that this team goes undefeated? Yeah. Is it likely? Probably not. But I don't see an upset like we saw a couple years ago. Remember that winless Hartford team pulling off that crazy upset against, I think at the time was the number 1 top-seeded Seawolves team like a couple years ago. It's going to be a team that's picking up some steam, whether that's UAlbany or Vermont or Binghamton.
Well, is typical of the America East. Everybody plays a tough non-conference schedule. And one that stands out is because Maine, of course, has been Stony Brook's biggest obstacle in recent years to getting to the NCAA. So let me give everybody a picture of Maine's non-conference schedule. They started out at Nebraska, got beat by 58 points. Providence in the Big East lost in overtime. Okay, got beat pretty handily by Delaware, so they lost their first 3 games of the season. Beat Yale, beat BU, lost to Army in double OT, got beat pretty good by Princeton, got beat up by Drexel. Then Rhode Island, they lost by a point, and just recently today beat Dartmouth. So that is not really much of an indicator of how they're going to fare in the America East. They've got one more non-conference game, and that is on Wednesday against Northeastern, and then they start their conference schedule same day the Seawolves do at Vermont. So Maine could still be a threat. The thing that can throw people off is they look at these records, and with the exception of Hartford, which is, as we said, is relegating themselves. That's to be expected. There's nobody out there. UMBC is 1-9, but if you take a look at, let's say Stony Brook's first opponent in the America East this year will be NJIT, and they lost to Wagner. Then they had to go to Marquette, Wisconsin. They beat Wisconsin on the road, beat LIU in overtime, beat Central Connecticut, lost by 10 to Fairleigh Dickinson, beat St. Peter's, lost to Rider, Lafayette, lost to Monmouth. So, those teams are pretty much on their level. Beat St. Francis. So that's a team that, could give Stony Brook a tough time. But the most important thing here is that they've all been tuning up, and these non-conference records can be rather deceptive. I mean, take a perfect example being Maine. I mean, they ran the gauntlet. And just taking a look at, let's say, another one here, looking at Binghamton, who's 4-5 on the season so far. They've got losses to Cornell, St. Bonaventure, Fairleigh Dickinson, Lehigh, and Eastern Michigan. So again, they're teams that, on their level or slightly above, but as I said, the custom in the America East, they fight at their weight or even beyond. And there have been some big wins by America East teams, not just Stony Brook in this non-conference schedule. I mean, if you are looking at the conference as a whole, you got to be very happy. And what's most important is when this happens, I mean, the Seawolves got a 13 seed last year when they advanced to the NCAA tournament. You know, could they be higher? I mean, Washington State was a 9.
Wow. It is really exciting times, especially for this program. You know, and there are questions too, you know, coming in, actually Langford having, you know, some of these new players transfer in, like Earl Scott, for example, from the prior season, obviously Corley coming in as well. And, you know, these players are producing. They're just meshing so well. And it's just, I think, just so much great chemistry going on between everyone, like the veterans, like India Pagan, you know, players like Annie Warren stepping up in their roles as scoring producers. Earl Scott, the same thing. Gigi Gonzalez, you know, as an underclasswoman doing the same. So, you know, there's really a lot of great things going on. And what makes the Stony Brook team so tough, especially to compete against defensively, is that they got so many scores and so many different ways to score. And their triangle, you know, motion offense, there's so many moving pieces that it's so tough to, you know, try to decide who you want to target, who you think is going to get the ball, because it could go to so many places, inside and outside.
Now we can turn to the men, because they had a nice win Saturday night, and they ended up beating the St. Francis Peacocks, and they are right now right behind, again, non-conference schedule, 7-4 record after a rough start. UMass Lowell is actually ahead of them, and of course, taking a picture of what UMass Lowell has been doing. They beat Rivier, and they beat Dayton, lost to Oklahoma State, lost to UMass, lost to Brown in the Ivy League, and lost to BU. Okay, the big wins, they beat GW, A10. Let's see, they beat Fisher, what big deal, it's a D3 school, I believe, or it used to be anyway. Merrimack win there, and MCLA, I'm not even sure who they are. Sacred Heart, 70-62, that was today. And there you go. They will have faced St. Francis of Brooklyn on the 23rd, and then their America East kicks in against Binghamton at Binghamton on January 2nd. So, again, that schedule may be about equal to Stony Brook's, maybe not quite as tough, because you throw away the first 2 losses at George Mason and Kansas, and the Seawolves look pretty good, okay? The only really bad loss in their schedule, there are 2 bad losses, I should say, other than those 2. Fairfield was a game that they lost by 5, and Wagner, they were just not there. But they've won 4 straight since. St. Peter's, they won on a blocked shot and ended up stealing that one 64-63. And that was rather impressive leading up to the Florida game here.
Yeah, this was a game, too, that was falling out of Stony Brook's grasp. To me, this is one of the should wins, and, you know, it was definitely a bit closer than anticipated. Because before to Stevenson Moore's game-saving block, Seawolves had to go on a 14-4 run just to put themselves up by 7 with a minute 56 to go. And, you know, shooting wasn't necessarily there, especially in that first half. They were down by as many as 12. But in the second half, you started to see guys wake up. Jaleel Jenkins, for example, played tremendously in that second half. He led the game with 15 points, and 8 of those came in the second half alone. 13 of those came in the second half alone. So he was doing all of his damage then. And it's like once they found that opening, they were able to just continue exploiting it through him, as he was able to finish with his 8th game in double figures this season. So 8th straight game in double figures, 9th this season.
So Jenkins set the pace with 15 points. Tyke Green, 12, and Anthony Roberts, 11. But
Green had a good game, just missed out on a double-double. But he was big in keeping them in there, did a lot of his scoring in the first half, and really rebounding the ball as well. You know, for Stony Brook, they struggled shooting. They only went 34% from the floor, 19 from three-point range. What kept them in, Matt, was the free throws. Because once they started forcing them, they started clawing their way back into the game, and ultimately finished going 15 of 19 from the charity stripe.
Now, neither team really shot that well from 3. 5 for 26 for the Seawolves, so they shot worse. But 5 for 20 was not much better on St. Peter's part. But they got the shots where they needed to, and Green went 5 for 10, Jenkins went 5 for 19, and Roberts went 4 for 10. So they did manage to, pull it out, and of course by the slimmest of margins.
That's big for them too.
Their first half shooting was rather abysmal because they went 1 for 16 from 3-point range in the first half, and then 4 for 10, respectable in the second, but 9 for 34 overall. So
yeah, it was bad. It was especially concerning to me when you go back to Tuesday's game against Central Connecticut State. They won 87-67. It's because early on in the game, they scored 18 unanswered points and ultimately took a 22-7 lead pretty early on in the contest. Jenkins was a big part of that because he scored 8 minutes within the first few minutes, and he finished with a game-high 21 points. And the team was firing on all cylinders, especially from 3-point range. The team set a career highs with 34 field goals made and 14 3-pointers overall. So, it was definitely concerning. You go into the next game thinking you can ride on that momentum, and through the first 25 minutes of the game, there's just no shooting for the Seawolves.
Now you have this game that is looming large coming up because you thought they were done with the big schools with Kansas, but no. They've got Florida, SEC school, ranked 20th, I believe, last we checked.
Yep.
And, again, a ranked team, but at Florida, at Gainesville. Nice trip, don't get me wrong. Johnny Winca is actually making the trip down there, and he's going to be broadcasting the game for us. But we're going to have it on the air, which is the most important part. But it's one of those games that it's not going to be necessarily an accurate portrayal of where the Seawolves stand right now. I think right now they're in pretty good position once the America East starts out, especially because they're starting out against NJIT and Hartford. NJIT is a budding rivalry, as we know.
That's not Hartford UMBC.
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong schedule here. Okay, Hartford UMBC. But even then, Hartford, the same problem with the men as it is for the women.
Yeah, for Hartford, they still got that, tournament loss fresh in their mind from a couple seasons ago, which was the last kind of, regular home game before the pandemic wiped everything out in the full season. There's still, a couple players there that definitely remember that. And it's a Stony Brook team for me, for Florida, as you said, it's a great tune-up. And I think it's just big that they managed to get that consistency in order, and the team that was playing on Wednesday, shows up for the game against Florida, so on and so forth. And obviously not going to be shooting as good, but still, you don't want to see as abysmal as they were yesterday. But it's interesting too with this Florida team, because to me, these are two teams kind of still looking for that identity and that consistency, because Florida, early on in the season, they were great, and because they were so well defensively and had that team first mentality. But, recently they've been really struggling in that set, but still playing good enough basketball to win because they're good at forcing turnovers, scoring in transition.
Mm-hmm. So we can look beyond that. I mean, the Seawolves are concentrating primarily on Florida, but they do have one remaining non-conference game, which would be next Wednesday. This Wednesday is Florida. Next Wednesday is Farmingdale, and then Hartford on Sunday, January 2nd, which seems to be the day everybody starts in the America East on the men's side.
They should win that one by a lot, considering last two times they faced Farmingdale, Stony Brook won 91-42, 91-44. So that's a game where if they're performing like they did against Wagner, and not like how they're performing against Central Connecticut, big red flags entering the conference season.
Well, yeah, Wagner was a big red flag, and I think it had a lot to do with that win against Hofstra, because Hofstra, of course, had a long winning streak against the Seawolves. It'd be 5 in a row, if I recall correctly. And the Seawolves just dominated end-to-end on that game back on December 8th, which was a couple of weeks ago. Okay, so America East, of course, kicks in, and then it's America East the rest of the way after Hartford. But we are at that impasse time with basketball, where we're going into the Christmas break, and we're going to come out of it. And this goes for just about everybody in college basketball. And even some schools like the MAC, they're already underway in conference, and even the Big East is underway too. Yeah,
it's going to be fun. I think that level of unpredictability is still there. And obviously, seeing these Stony Brook programs, mid-major programs, doing, big things on the women's side, defeating a couple of power conference schools, like the win today. On the men's side, getting a big win against the Hofstra team, which has been playing pretty good aside from the loss, and are predicted to place pretty highly in the CAA polls. It's exciting times for sure for these programs, and especially, the men's one, or the past couple seasons where they were really missing that extra gear that they seem to find so far through most of the season. So it's going to be exciting, but, the unpredictability is still there with so many pieces, both in and out of these programs' controls, like injuries or like missing time because of COVID-19 precautions, or games having to be postponed or rescheduled, or whatever's going to go on in this season.
Find something made out of wood to knock on, because when the Seawolves have encountered the problems, and as we said with the women, that wasn't on the Seawolves' end, that was on Hofstra's end. Hofstra suspended that game, not Stony Brook. So that got them scrambling for the game with Washington State.
Marist.
And they did lose that Marist game, but that was Marist too. That wasn't Stony Brook.
Right.
So Seawolves, so far, keep your fingers crossed, have been very fortunate from that point of view.
They're playing as projected, and that's good. Playing as advertised, because we've seen in the past with other programs, football and men's soccer come to mind, where they're predicted to finish pretty highly, and they don't look too strong entering conference season. They fall even flatter. Exactly.
So, as we said, the non-conference, you take a look at the standings on AmericaEast.com, and you see UMass Lowell in front, Stony Brook and Vermont with identical 7-4 records. Just want to go over Vermont a little bit, because they're always a problem for the men. And they lost a relatively close one, lost by 11 to number 21 Maryland back on November 13th. Oakland University in Michigan, they lost by 2. UNCG, they lost by 3. Lost by 10 to Providence. That wasn't such a bad loss against a Big East opponent, which is a pretty good Big East opponent, and just beat Brown. Their game against Northeastern was scheduled for today, was canceled. Guess why? And they have one more non-conference game on Wednesday against Colgate, and then they will begin their conference schedule after Christmas against UAlbany.
Yeah, they're up there with the Seawolves, Matt. 7-4, as we said overall. But to me, I think the big thing for the Catamounts is their defense, because they're playing these great teams, and so far they got the best defense in the conference. They're holding their opponents to under 60 per game, while they're able to score 65. And Seawolves, again, it's non-conference schedule, but for the Seawolves to score 72 and while give up 73, it kind of goes to show that you're already not taking games against Vermont lightly, but they're going to come in with a really good defense, and you're going to have to put in a lot of work to hit your season averages so far.
Another team that, of course, has been a perennial thorn in Stony Brook's side, UAlbany, on the men's side and on the women's side, but in particular for the men, they played a pretty tough schedule as well and lost their first 5 games to the likes of Towson, LaSalle, Harvard, Eastern Kentucky, and the Kentucky Wildcats. And before finally pulling out a 2-point win against Eastern Illinois Thanksgiving week, then they dropped another game to Kansas State and Yale, and then Columbia and BC wins there, lost to Niagara, and they have a couple of non-conference games before they start off against Vermont, Lehigh and Bucknell. And Albany plays the regional powers. I mean, they've played Syracuse probably more often than any other America East school, but they didn't do it this year. But again, you look at those schools, and another perfect case of, throw away the non-conference record, they can be pretty tough too.
Yeah, for them for sure. It's definitely about building that chemistry and kind of dictating, what play style they want to force. And, just looking at this team, they really want to work inside and really want to run the offense, especially through Devondre Perry, who's off to a pretty good start, 12 points per game, shooting just around 48%. And he's doing a good job, especially working inside, not taking too many three-pointers. It's been Matt Cerruti who's been their three-point specialist. He's shooting 45% from the field. So, they've definitely been working on that offensively, as well as really crashing the boards, which I think is going to play a pivotal part in turning some extremely close games. And it's something, the Stony Brook doesn't really excel at outside of a guy like Tyke Green. But if Stony Brook has their threes going on, they don't have to worry too much about it because it's going in the basket.
The only thing that bothers me about this men's team right now is that, we're talking about a player who hits 45% from three. You hear about teams that are absolutely dominant from beyond the arc or dominant down low. There isn't one aspect of Stony Brook's game where they're necessarily dominant. Everything has to be on for them to win. Now, fortunately, that happens a lot, but it's not like they can ride anything, if you know what I mean. There are some nights when they might be able to ride the threes, but you can't do it every week. You can't do it every night. And it may be that Albany can, but on the other hand, if you're the Seawolves, you just plug up the perimeter and see if the shots fall then. But the most important thing here is that they're balanced. You can say they're balanced in a good way and in a bad way. They're balanced in a good way because they can beat you many different ways, but they're balanced in a bad way because they can blow the game many different ways.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think more so they're taking definitely a lot more three-pointers now than I think I've ever seen them take. I think even in the Jamil Warney days, they weren't taking and making this many three-pointers. 35% from the field so far this season and lead the conference with 100 through their first 11 games, along with UMBC. But, I agree. I still like these lineups they're putting out there for the most part. And I think the issue, too, is they had to adjust with Elijah Olani missing time the past 6 or 7 games because of a lower body injury. So they've had to adjust, and you're losing a key slasher like that, a key guy who really worked the inside. Obviously, it leaves a hole in that offense, and they've been having to adjust around that by relying more on the three-point guys like Frankie Policelli, like Tyke Green or Jillo Jenkins.
Well, you know what? Stony Brook's relationship with the three-point shot has been kind of a love-hate over the years because I remember, in the old building, before the Island Federal Credit Union Arena was renovated, the lighting wasn't that great, and the Seawolves always had trouble from three, but for some strange reason, the visiting team shot well against them. And Navy, I think, rained like 13 threes and a half once against them, and the Seawolves couldn't hit the ocean that game. And it would leave everybody scratching their heads. How come the visitors can hit threes and Stony Brook can't? And that went on for years. And, again, it's become a bit more balanced, but to say that this is a team that has lived and died on the three would not be true. They never have. It's been part of their history that the three-point shot has been inconsistent for them.
Yeah, I think if anything, now is really the first time you're starting to see this team aim more heavily on three-pointers. I thought you saw it last year as well, but they really didn't have the pieces to do it. And as well, they really, I thought, really struggled in that sense because just of the screen game, the pick and roll game, it just wasn't there working for them last season. I think now they're doing a lot better job at creating space, especially on the pick and roll or pick and pop, and is getting those guys who weren't able to be open over the past few years, or getting guys in positions where they really wouldn't be, on the wing or around the perimeter. It was going back to those old Stony Brook teams. They had big guys, like 6'10", 7-foot guys, like obviously guys like Jimmy Warney, even afterwards Mo Gee. They still have Alex Christie, who's I think their tallest guy, their lone 7-footer. But go back to the Stony Brook offenses, and they rely a lot on those guys to work down in the post or inside the perimeter to make shots. Now they think is where they're starting to space out, give guys the room and opportunities to create shots either through iso ball or through threes.
Well, I'll tell you something, just going back to the women very, very briefly. The one thing I noticed is that the Seawolves were so not attached to the three-point shot that a lot of the players taking outside shots weren't even looking for the line. And, you know how a lot of people take a pass, making sure they would be behind the line, step back, and then take the shot. Seawolves were taking 17-footers all over the place.
Yeah.
And they didn't seem to care whether it was good for 2 or 3.
Yeah, that's the thing, too, with Coach Langford's system is that, it was like that as well under Coach McCombs. But that's the thing is, they're more concerned about getting the bucket as opposed to, how much it is. Because, again, it goes back to stacking up those points. It really doesn't necessarily matter if it's 2 or 3 if you're able to go on a 12-2 run like this women's team has been consistently able to do throughout a lot of the season. They're able to score from so many different ways because again, these players and guards in particular can score from so many positions in and out of the arc. And not only that, but players like Gigi Gonzalez and Earl Scott, Annie Warren are good at drawing fouls as well when they cut inside. So, you're tough. It's already tough having to determine, all right, is Gonzalez going to pop or is she going to roll down baseline on the screen? And when she comes under and beats you, by the time you get a hand on the ball, you're making contact with her. She's making the shot, some ridiculous, circus shot going in and gets the foul. So that's really how they've been doing a lot of their damage this season. And it's what makes them one of the better teams in the NCAA.
Okay, so it's been nothing but basketball for the past couple of weeks. The swimming team last had an event on December 5th, and they won't be back in action until January. And again, nothing but basketball from here